Mike Green is probably a name, if you're a Falcons fan and you pay close attention to the draft, that you've heard a lot. And it's because he's led the country in sacks, 17 sacks last season for the Marshall Thundering Herd. And there are questions about the competition, but you can't really poke too many holes in 17 sacks. That's on-field production that if you're playing Division I football and you have 17 sacks in 14, 13 games, you're doing something right. And there's been a lot of guys that have come out of the MAC with that kind of production and gone on to have great careers, a la Khalil Mack, who went to Buffalo. So there's reason why the Falcons, who need a pass rusher, should be interested. And if it weren't for off-the-field accusations, this is a guy that I think would be a lock for a top 10, especially after his pro day performance, which it turned heads. I mean, he was basically number one. He didn't go to the combine, but he was basically number one. His three-cone drill, his shuttle, everything, number one for all defensive ends. So you combine that with the on-field production, and you're kind of like, is this a guy that's going to be available at 15? And if not, it's probably because of off-the-field accusations. And if he is available, will the Falcons take him?
I hope so. Like you said, they are accusations, nothing substantiated to this point. 2 sexual assault accusations, one in high school, one at Virginia, I believe. And I think what's so complicated about it is because there isn't a huge paper trail. I don't know the details, but I can absolutely guarantee you that the Falcons have, dug into this. These are billion-dollar, basically, not Fortune 500 companies, but they are Fortune 500 companies. They have private investigators that can do a lot more than a bunch of, idiots sitting here talking to their own mic. So if they're comfortable, I feel like you should probably be comfortable, especially from a Falcons team that preaches, ethos. We're as interested in the person you are as the player. They passed on Jalen Carter for obvious off the field concerns, went with Bijan Robinson, who's almost like a choir boy compared to Jalen Carter. Like time and time again, they're trying to find the guy, the locker room presence, as well as the on the field stuff. But even if you do have a small concern about, kind of what he does off the field, I think if you're the Atlanta Falcons, when you're talking about maybe a running back, it's like, okay, that's one thing. We're talking about the second most important position on a football field. And one area in particular, the Falcons have sucked, flat out sucked. It might be time to take a risk, take a leap of faith on a guy. You look him in the eye and you see what he's about. Mike Green might just be that guy.
Yeah, and the Falcons were in attendance. Raheem Morris was right there in attendance. I mean, he was up close and personal to what this – I want to read out his three-cone. There's 6.85 three-cone. It's 99th percentile, number one among defensive ends and linebackers in this class. Average NFL edge three-cone, 7.23. And you just go through the numbers, size, strength, everything, top. I mean, it's an athletic freak that matches on-field production and a skill level that if these weren't there, and I still think there's a good chance he goes in the top 10, and this is a moot point.
Me too.
This is a moot point when all said and done.
See if this is crazy. And maybe there is somebody I'm not. Maybe James Pierce might be the argument. But last year I said that, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas were closer to Marvin Harrison than a guy like Rome Odunze was to Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. And a la their rookie year showed maybe they were the two best rookies.
Maybe.
But I think that Mike Green might be much closer to Abdul Carter, who is the consensus top edge, than anyone is to Mike Green. So it would be like James Pierce, maybe Shamar Stewart, Mykel Williams, Jalen Walker's the tweener, so you can't really conclude him. But I don't think that's crazy to say.
Yeah. No, I think –
which would put him squarely in the top 10.
I think there's two things. You obviously have the accusations, and then you have the idea that he played at Marshall. Obviously, the fact that Abdul Carter was doing what he was able to do at Penn State University and doing it
hurt and in the playoffs.
Yeah, and in the playoffs where he was the best player on the field.
Yeah.
That was just kind of like a head turner where it's like if you had any questions about him, which you probably shouldn't have had many to begin with, you can put all those to bed. He's the number one. But I agree. There's a world that providing that he's able to keep his nose clean, that Mike Green is the best defensive player in this class. I don't think that's a ridiculous thing to say at all. I mean, in terms of upside and floor, I think he is a perfect match for what the Falcons should be looking for. And I do think it's a big sign that Raheem Morris was there for his pro day, because I don't think this is an organization that takes those kind of accusations or off the field concerns lightly. And if they're there, that means they're seriously considering taking a close look at this guy. If your head coach is sitting there watching, he wasn't there for anyone else on the Thundering Herd. He was there for one player.
I saw somebody,
Mike Green.
I saw somebody on Falcons Twitter that got the 92.9 reporter who got fired years ago, being like, talking like Raheem Morris wasn't just there for Mike Green. Marshall has this guy and this guy. I looked them up. They're like day 3 draft picks. I was like, buddy, there's no way a head coach is going to a pro day other than the Nick Saban Bamas, the Kirby Smart Georgias, where obviously there's 12 guys who could get drafted at any given point. Also, Georgia is 45 minutes down the road from Flowery Branch. No head coach is just showing up to Marshall. No offense, no disrespect if you're a Marshall fan. Love that movie. But, that's a program that's a tier below the Georgias and maybe a couple tiers below. Yeah. So, it is notable that he was there. Now, it wasn't the Michael Penix private workout. I saw some people compare it to that. I think that is completely different. Michael Penix had a private workout where Arthur Blank sent his private jet filled with Falcons personnel to Washington to watch Michael Penix throw. They obviously fell in love with him. This was a pro day. A little bit different, still notable.
Yeah, and I think the main reason it's notable is because, I think it's a really blank yes, no. Like, if you're going to consider a guy for what perceived off the field issues or, character concerns or stuff like that, like, you're either not going to consider them all or you're all the way in, right? Like, so if Mike Green's available and you're out there doing all this scouting, it's tough to me. If they believe he's the best player, it seems like they would go after him in this situation, because if they had these serious concerns, it would be a no. And why would he even be there?
And Bijan Robinson was taken in the Arthur Smith era. They were still preaching the ethos, but Raheem Morris feels like it's almost a little bit more of that kind of thing. But I also, on the flip side of that, is like, you're Raheem Morris. You've got this, world-class smile. You've got the charisma. You've got the personality. We've got some veterans now in the locker room. Maybe you should be confident in this building ethos to take a guy who might be on the fringe to be like, we can handle it.
Well, I mean, that's what good organizations do. I mean, that's why when Jalen Carter landed with Philly, it was almost like all those off the field concerns just
immediately disappeared.
Yeah, and nobody even talked about him. No one like once the draft
happened, now is the best interior defender.
Everyone was like, yeah, he's going to go there and he's going to thrive. He's going to be around veterans. They're going to keep him right. He's going to get far away from Georgia, where maybe some of those problem areas, those red flags existed. He's going to go with a bunch of guys that he's played with. And it wasn't even before Jalen Carter stepped on the field. It seemed like all of those things had already disappeared. And that's what good organizations do. And the Falcons have spent all this time on these guys, building these characters, building this culture that's like been such a big deal to them. And if you can't go in there and convince a guy that you maybe have a little question marks to keep his nose clean, then maybe you don't have the culture. What's the point of building this culture?
Maybe you don't even have the culture you think you do. And maybe a factor in all of this is we never had the guy. Like when we were drafting Bijan Robinson, we had bums under center. And no offense, Kirk Cousins is a great leader to a certain extent, but Michael Penix this is his team now. Everybody should be answering to a couple of guys, and that is Jake Matthews, Jesse Bates, Mike Penix, maybe a couple of other guys. If you bring in now somebody like that, instead of when you've got a Desmond Ridder who, we heard all this stuff about leadership and all that bull crap, nobody really believed that it was Desmond Ridder's team, even if he was buttoned up. Michael Penix, this is his team. So, like, now you do have somebody to answer to if you're Mike Green and you do step out of line. Like, you do have somebody to answer to, and no offense, but, like, Michael Penix strikes a little bit more fear in me than, choir boy Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I agree. And listen, I've fallen in love a little bit with Mike Green here throughout this process. Everything you've seen.
All Falcons fans
the way he's dominated Senior Bowl, the way he's looked at Pro Bowl, the on the field production at Marshall is better than anybody in all of Division I football. Like, All the flags, as far as those things go, are just shining green, which scares me to one degree because it's like, is he really going to be there at 15? But it also, if he is there at 15 and the Falcons are able to land him, you got at least a little bit of excitement in that pass rushing room. I haven't had that in a long time. Whether you agree with what's in the character department or not.